When I received the invitation to stay at Skinwalker Ranch, I couldn't believe my luck. For years, I had been fascinated by the stories of UFO sightings, mysterious creatures, and unexplained phenomena surrounding this notorious location. As an amateur investigator of the paranormal, I knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Little did I know, my experience would surpass anything I had imagined. I arrived at the ranch on a crisp autumn afternoon. The sky was a deep blue, the kind that stretches infinitely in the Utah desert. As I drove up the long, dusty road to the main house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The property was expansive, with wide-open fields, dense patches of trees, and the distant silhouette of the Uinta Mountains. After settling into the guest room, I met with the ranch's caretaker, Tom. He was a grizzled man in his late 50s, with a haunted look in his eyes that spoke volumes. Over a cup of strong coffee, he shared stories of the ranch's eerie history, tales of UFO sightings, strange lights, and bizarre animal mutilations. "You need to be careful out here," he warned. "This land has a way of getting under your skin. Things happen that you can't explain, and once you see them, you're never the same." That night, I set up my camera equipment in a clearing near the main house. I had a state-of-the-art night vision camera, a thermal imaging device, and several motion sensors. I was determined to capture something, anything, that would prove the legends true. As the sun dipped below the horizon, an eerie silence descended on the ranch. Even the crickets seemed to fall silent, as if they too were wary of what the night might bring. Around midnight, the air grew thick with tension. A strange hum began to fill the atmosphere, so low and pervasive that I felt it vibrating in my chest. I scanned the sky, my heart racing with anticipation. Then, out of nowhere, the night was split by a blinding light. I shielded my eyes, trying to make out the source. Hovering above the ranch was a massive triangular UFO. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, with smooth metallic surfaces and glowing edges that pulsed with a soft blue light. It moved with an eerie silence, the only sound being that persistent hum. I fumbled with my camera, desperately trying to capture the spectacle. But as soon as I powered it on, the screen went black. I tried my thermal imaging device and my motion sensors. Nothing worked. It was as if the UFO was emitting some kind of electromagnetic field that interfered with all my electronics. In sheer awe, I watched as the craft hovered for what felt like an eternity. It made no sudden movements, almost as if it was observing me, just as I was observing it. My mind raced with questions. Who or what was piloting it? Why were they here? And what did they want? Suddenly, the UFO shifted. It tilted slightly, and a smaller craft detached from its underside, descending slowly towards the ground. Panic surged through me, but my feet felt glued to the spot. I wanted to run, but curiosity and fear held me in place. The smaller craft landed silently about 50 yards away from me. Its door opened, and a ramp extended to the ground. I strained my eyes, trying to see if anything would emerge. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a figure appeared at the top of the ramp. It was tall and slender, with elongated limbs and a head that seemed too large for its body. Its skin was pale and luminescent, almost glowing in the dark. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was looking at an alien. The being stepped down the ramp and began to walk towards me. Its movements were smooth and fluid, almost hypnotic. My heart pounded in my chest as it drew closer. When it was just a few feet away, it stopped and tilted its head as if studying me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I felt an overwhelming sense of connection, as if it was communicating with me on a level beyond words. Then, without warning, a bright light engulfed us both. I felt a strange sensation, as if I was being pulled in multiple directions at once. My vision blurred, and the next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground, staring up at the stars. The UFO was gone. I sat up, my body trembling. My equipment was scattered around me, all of it useless. I checked my watch. It was 3 hours later than when I had first seen the UFO. I had no memory of what happened during that time, only a vague sense of disorientation and unease. I stumbled back to the house, my mind racing. Tom was waiting for me on the porch, a concerned look on his face. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded, still in shock. He sighed and handed me a glass of water. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. This place, it changes you." It was my first day at Skinwalker Ranch, and I was both excited and nervous. I had heard all the legends and watched countless documentaries, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. As a new hire, my job was to help with the cattle and learn the ropes from the seasoned ranch hands. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the property, when Tom, the lead hand, asked me to join him in checking on the herd. The cattle seemed agitated, more so than usual, their eyes wide with an almost human-like fear. Tom said it was not uncommon for them to be spooked, but there was something different in the air tonight. We moved through the fields, the cool evening air heavy with tension. As we reached the edge of the pasture, we noticed something disturbing. The cattle had disappeared. One moment they were there, and the next, the field was eerily empty. Tom's face went pale, and he muttered under his breath, "Not again." We split up to search the property, the silence around us growing more oppressive with each step. I headed towards the old barn, a dilapidated structure that seemed to hold its own secrets. As I approached, I heard a low, guttural moaning coming from inside. My heart raced, and my hands shook as I pushed the door open. The sight inside was something out of a nightmare. The cattle were stacked on top of each other in a twisted, unnatural pile. Their bodies were contorted, legs jutting out at odd angles, and their eyes were wide with terror. There were no signs of a struggle, no tracks leading in or out. It was as if they had been dropped from the sky. I backed away, feeling bile rise in my throat. Tom appeared beside me, his face grim. "We need to set up surveillance," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't the first time this has happened." That night, we placed cameras around the barn and waited. The air was thick with unease, and every sound made me jump. Around midnight, a low hum filled the air, growing louder and more intense. The barn door creaked open, and a cold wind blew through, sending shivers down my spine. Suddenly, the moaning began again, louder and more anguished. I grabbed my flashlight and ran towards the barn, Tom close behind. The sight that greeted us was beyond comprehension. The cattle were now scattered across the floor, their bodies marked with strange, burned symbols. My flashlight flickered, and the temperature dropped rapidly. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and I could see my breath in the cold air. I turned to Tom, his face a mask of fear. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently. As we turned to leave, the barn door slammed shut with a force that shook the ground. We were plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the symbols on the cattle's bodies. The oppressive silence was broken by a whispering voice, repeating our names over and over. We backed into a corner, clutching our flashlights like lifelines. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel a presence closing in. The shadows in the barn seemed to move, coalescing into a dark figure with glowing red eyes. "Leave this place," it hissed, its voice echoing in our minds. "You do not belong here." Panic set in, and I swung my flashlight at the figure. It passed through harmlessly, but the act broke whatever hold it had on me. Tom and I bolted for the door, which miraculously swung open. We didn't stop running until we reached the main house, where the other ranch hands found us, breathless and terrified. They didn't question our story. Their faces mirrored our fear. "The darkness here is real," one of them said solemnly. "It won't let you go once it has its sights on you." I left Skinwalker Ranch the next day, my spirit broken. The experience had shaken me to my core, leaving scars that would never fully heal. Even now, I can still hear those whispers in the dead of night, a haunting reminder of the terror that lurks in the shadows of Skinwalker Ranch. I was convinced I had seen it all: UFOs, strange lights, and unexplained noises. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered next. I decided to venture into the woods with a flashlight, hoping to capture some nocturnal wildlife on my night vision camera. As I entered the woods, an oppressive silence enveloped me. The trees seemed to close in, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. My flashlight cast long, eerie shadows on the forest floor, and every crunch of leaves underfoot echoed ominously in the stillness. After about 30 minutes of walking, I began to feel a strange sensation, like I was being watched. I stopped and scanned the area with my night vision camera, but saw nothing. Yet the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing minute. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Suddenly, a rustling noise came from the bushes to my left. I froze, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Slowly, I turned towards the sound, half expecting to see a deer or some other animal. But what emerged from the darkness was no ordinary creature. A figure stepped out of the bushes, tall and emaciated, its skin a sickly, mottled gray. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, reflecting the beam of my flashlight. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, as if it were a marionette controlled by an unseen puppet master. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was looking at: a skinwalker. I had read about these creatures in the local legends, shapeshifters that could assume the form of animals or humans. But seeing one in person was far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, and a primal fear took hold of me. It felt as if those eyes were boring into my soul, reading my deepest fears. The skinwalker took a step towards me, and a guttural growl emanated from its throat. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs felt paralyzed with fear. The creature tilted its head, mimicking human curiosity, and let out a chilling laugh that echoed through the forest. Finally, my fight-or-flight response kicked in, and I turned and bolted deeper into the woods. Branches whipped at my face, and roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't dare slow down. Behind me, I could hear the creature giving chase, its footfalls unnaturally loud in the silent forest. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would give out. Desperation drove me forward, but I could sense the skinwalker closing the distance. Suddenly, I tripped over a root and went sprawling to the ground. Pain shot through my ankle, and I knew I had sprained it. Crawling to my feet, I turned to face the creature, knowing I had no choice but to confront it. The Skinwalker emerged from the shadows, its yellow eyes glowing with malevolent delight. It raised a hand, and I saw long, claw-like fingers glistening in the moonlight. With a final, desperate effort, I grabbed a large stick and swung it at the creature. The Skinwalker dodged effortlessly, its movements unnervingly fluid. It lunged at me, and I felt a sharp pain as its claws raked across my arm. Blood flowed freely, and the pain was excruciating, but adrenaline kept me moving. I swung the stick again, this time connecting with the creature's head. It let out a furious scream and staggered back. Seizing the opportunity, I turned and hobbled away as fast as my injured ankle would allow. The creature's screams echoed through the forest, but I didn't look back. I stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin and threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me. My breaths came in ragged gasps, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I could hear the Skinwalker outside, circling the cabin, its growls and snarls sending waves of terror through me. Hours passed in agonizing silence, the creature's presence a constant, looming threat. I stayed huddled in a corner, clutching the stick like a lifeline. Finally, as dawn began to break, the growls ceased, and an eerie silence fell over the forest once more. I waited until the first light of day seeped through the cracks in the cabin walls before I dared to move. Limping back to the main house, I felt a profound sense of dread. The Skinwalker was still out there, and I knew it wouldn't be the last time I encountered it. Tom was waiting for me on the porch, his face etched with concern. When he saw my injuries, he didn't need to ask what had happened. He simply nodded and helped me inside. As he tended to my wounds, he told me more about the Skinwalkers and the dark history of the land. "This place isn't just haunted," he said quietly. "It's cursed. The Skinwalkers are drawn to it, like moths to a flame. They feed on fear, and once they've marked you, they won't stop until they've claimed you." I left Skinwalker Ranch the next day, my body and spirit battered. The experience had shaken me to my core.